the most powerful invasion force the world had ever seen, never fired a shot. It wasn't real. In the spring of 1944, Fortress Europe waited. Adolf Hitler's Atlantic Wall, a 3,000-mile scar of concrete and steel, bristled with guns, all pointed at the sea. The greatest invasion in human history was coming. Everyone knew it. The question was not if, but where. The German High Command stared at their maps, their nerves stretched thin, waiting for the blow to fall. And in Kent, across the narrowest part of the English Channel, they saw it. 1 million men, thousands of tanks, a sea of landing craft, an army commanded by America's most feared and reckless general, George S. Patton. This was the first U.S. Army group, FUSAG. It was the tip of the Allied spear, and the Germans were terrified of it. There was only one problem. The army Hitler feared most was an illusion, a grand performance, a ghost story told with inflatable rubber, amplified sound, and whispered lies. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the men who fought a war of the mind, who wielded imagination as a weapon, and who conjured a phantom army from thin air to save the world. To understand the ghost, you must first understand the shadow it cast. By 1944, the tide had turned, but the war was far from over. The Soviet Union was grinding the Wehrmacht to dust in the east, but Western Europe remained under the Nazi boot. An invasion was the only path to liberation, but it was a logistical nightmare. The Atlantic Wall, propagandized by Goebbels as impenetrable, was a genuine monster. Rommel, the Desert Fox, had been tasked with reinforcing it. He had planted millions of mines, flooded low-lying fields, and placed deadly steel obstacles. Rommel's asparagus on every likely landing ground. A frontal assault was suicide, unless the enemy was looking the wrong way. The entire success of D-Day, of Operation Overlord, depended on one single fragile element: surprise. The Allies had to land in Normandy. Its beaches were wide, its location less obvious, and it was within range of air cover from England. But the Germans knew the logical target was the Pas de Calais. It was the shortest route. It had the best ports. It was the path of least resistance. Hitler himself was obsessed with Calais. He believed it was the only possible target. The Allied challenge was monumental. They had to assemble the real invasion force in the south of England, pointing at Normandy, while simultaneously convincing Hitler that an even bigger army was assembling in the southeast, pointing directly at Calais. They didn't just need a distraction. They needed a lie so enormous, so detailed, and so convincing that Hitler would stake the defense of France on it. This was Operation Fortitude, and at its heart was the phantom FUSAG. But how do you build an army from nothing? You don't recruit soldiers. You recruit artists. You recruit illusionists, sound engineers, architects, radio wizards, and set designers from Hollywood. In early 1944, a new top-secret unit was activated, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a collection of just over 100 men. They were gathered from art schools in New York, advertising agencies on Madison Avenue, and radio stations in the Midwest. Men like Bill Blass, the future fashion designer, Ellsworth Kelly, the future minimalist painter, Art Kane, the future photographer. They were thinkers, creators. They were handed a mission that sounded like madness. You will go to England, and you will impersonate an entire army group of 150,000 men. You will be the bait. The 23rd was, in essence, a traveling roadshow of deception. It was split into 4 components, each a master of a different kind of illusion. The first was the 603rd Camouflage Engineers. These were the visual artists. Their job was to be seen. They were given the most absurd weapon of the war, the inflatable tank. From a distance, from the air, a Type S Sherman tank made of rubber looked identical to one made of steel. The men would arrive at a new field in broad daylight, driving a few real trucks. Then the compressors would begin their high, whining hiss. Within minutes, rubbery hulls would rise from the grass. Canvas and plywood mock-ups of artillery pieces would be uncrated. Fake airplanes, all fabric and wood, would be parked on dummy airfields. But the genius was in the details. A tank is not just a shape. It leaves tracks, so the men would use special rollers to press the pattern of tank treads into the dirt. An army is not clean, so they would build fake field kitchens, string up laundry lines with uniforms, and even paint fake latrines. They were building a performance of military life. A few real tanks and trucks would be driven around the encampment, creating the dust, the noise, and the sense of constant movement, all for the benefit of the lone Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane that might fly overhead. This was a profoundly dangerous game. The men of the 603rd were artists, not armorers. Their tanks could be defeated by a single stray bullet, or even a sharp rock. They were a fragile lie, existing in the open. They lived with the constant gnawing fear that a German patrol would stumble upon them, or that a bombing run would target their fake motor pool, killing the very real men inside. They were painting a target on their own backs, hoping the enemy would believe the illusion long enough for the real army to be spared. If you find this story of ingenuity under pressure as compelling as we do, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to finding these hidden narratives of courage and creativity, and your support allows us to continue bringing them to light. The visual illusion was only one part of the equation. An army is not just seen, it is heard. This was the domain of the 3102nd Signal Service Company, the Sonic Deceivers. This was psychological warfare at its most primal. The unit was equipped with massive truck-mounted speakers, powerful enough to project sound for miles. Their ammunition was a library of sound effects, meticulously recorded at Fort Knox, Kentucky. They had recordings of armored divisions on the move, the deep, guttural rumble of Sherman tank engines, the high-pitched squeal and clatter of their treads, the metallic clink of equipment. They had the sounds of infantry divisions digging in, shouted commands, the thud of shovels into earth, the bark of a non-commissioned officer. The performances were almost always at night. Imagine it, a small convoy of trucks, carrying perhaps 30 men and their speaker systems, would drive into a dark, empty valley in the English countryside. They would arrange their equipment, pointing it towards the coast, towards the sensitive German listening posts just miles away. The cold night air would carry the sound perfectly. Then the show would begin. A sergeant would drop the needle on a massive acetate disc. Suddenly the darkness would erupt, not with light, but with sound. The ground itself would seem to vibrate with the passage of hundreds of invisible heavy tanks. The air would be filled with the ghostly voices of men who weren't there. To a German radio operator listening in a concrete bunker in Calais, his headphones pressed tight. This was not a recording. This was terror. This was the sound of Patton's army assembling for the attack. The men of the 3102nd would play their symphony of deception for hours, then pack up and vanish before dawn, leaving only a lingering echo and a report of heavy enemy armor movements on a German general's desk. But even sight and sound were not enough. A modern army lives on the radio. It is a creature of constant, chattering communication. This was the most complex part of the illusion, Operation Quicksilver, run by the Signal Company. They had to create the entire radio footprint of FUSAG. This meant broadcasting thousands of messages, 24 hours a day, from a phantom headquarters. They didn't just send random noise, they created a cast of fictional radio operators, each with a distinct fist, the unique rhythm and style that every Morse code operator possesses, as individual as a fingerprint. British signalmen, experts in mimicry, would study the fist of a real American operator, then replicate it, sending messages as if they were part of Patton's fake 3rd Armored Division. The content of the messages was a masterpiece of mundane deception. They sent endless, boring logistical traffic, requesting 10,000 pairs of boots, reporting fuel status for 5th Infantry, new coordinates for Divisional Field Hospital. It was this banality that made it so believable. Interspersed with this spoof traffic were carefully crafted pieces of disinformation, designed to be intercepted and decoded by the Germans. They discussed tide tables for the Calais coast. They complained about the food in Kent. They gossiped about General Patton's impending arrival. They were weaving a story, one coded dot and dash at a time, building an architecture of a lie that was so vast and so detailed, the Germans couldn't see its edges. They weren't just fooled. They were immersed. This intricate, multi-layered deception required a director. It needed a star. The Allies had the perfect man, General George S. Patton. By 1944, Patton was a man in exile. After the infamous slapping incident in Sicily, where he struck two shell-shocked soldiers, he had been relieved of command. He was the Allies' best, most aggressive and most famous field commander, and he was sidelined. But the Allies, in their brilliance, realized that the reputation of Patton was a weapon in itself. The Germans didn't just respect Patton, they feared him. They saw him as the quintessential American cowboy, the only general capable of leading the main invasion. So, Patton was given a new command, the Phantom Fusag. He was, in effect, asked to become an actor. He was driven around Kent and East Anglia in his trademark pearl-handled pistols and gleaming helmet, inspecting his inflatable tanks. He gave fiery speeches to fields of empty tents, knowing German spies were watching. He visited his fake headquarters, all for show. For a man of action like Patton, this must have been a private hell. He was a lion in a cage, forced to play act while the real war, the one he craved, was being planned by his rival, General Bradley. Yet, he played his part to perfection. His very presence in Kent was the capstone of the entire deception. Where Patton was, the Germans believed, the main attack would be. And then, there was the final, most crucial layer, the layer of human intelligence. The deception wouldn't work if the Germans didn't have proof from their own trusted sources. This is where the double-cross system, run by MI5, performed its greatest miracle. The British had, by this point, captured or turned every single German agent operating in the United Kingdom. Not one was still loyal to Hitler. The most important of these was a Spanish chicken farmer named Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the British as Garbo, and to the Germans as Arabelle. Garbo was a master of the imagination. He despised the Nazi regime and had offered his services to the British, who initially ignored him. So, he went to the Germans, offered to be their spy, and simply invented his reports. He created a fictional network of 27 sub-agents, a disgruntled airline official, a Welsh fascist, a talkative secretary, all of whom were figments of his own mind. He was a novelist, and the German high command was his audience. He fed them a brilliant mix of true but useless information and strategically devastating lies. His German handlers loved him. They believed he was their most valuable asset. And in the months leading up D-Day, Garbo's entire network began to send frantic, corroborating reports. They saw Patton. They heard the tanks. They confirmed the unit patches of Fusag. They were the ones who told Berlin with absolute certainty that the army in Kent was real, and Calais was the target. They were the final, trusted voice that turned Hitler's assumption into unshakable fact. The stage was now set. The artists, the sound men, the radio operators, the actor general, and the master spy had all played their parts. The entire German 15th Army, a massive force of 19 divisions and their best panzer units, was dug in at Pas-de-Calais, their binoculars trained on the coast of Kent. Waiting for Patton's ghosts, on the night of June 5, 1944, the real invasion force, Operation Overlord, set sail for Normandy. As thousands of ships crossed the Channel, the Ghost Army began its final, greatest performance. The 3102nd Signal Company drove to the coast and unleashed a sonic storm. They played the sounds of a massive fleet weighing anchor, of naval bombardments, of men shouting commands to board landing craft, The radio operators of Fusag lit up the airwaves with a flood of messages, all indicating an imminent sea crossing. Garbo sent his most urgent message yet to Berlin. The invasion is coming now, and it is aimed at Calais. When the first reports of landings at Normandy reached Hitler's headquarters, he scoffed. This was exactly what Garbo had warned him about. This was the feint, a diversionary tactic to draw his panzers away from the real prize. He ordered the 15th Army to stand fast. The panzers were not to move. They must wait for Patton. This was the critical moment. The first 24 hours at Normandy were chaos. The American forces at Omaha Beach were pinned down, nearly annihilated. A single, determined panzer counterattack on that first day could have driven the Allies back into the sea. It could have shattered the invasion and changed the course of the war. But that counterattack never came. The panzers sat and waited. They waited for an army of rubber. They waited for the echo of a recording. They waited for a phantom. The story of the Ghost Army didn't end on June 6th. Their work had only just begun. The lie had to be maintained. For weeks after D-Day, as the real battle raged in the Normandy hedgerows, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops continued their performance in Kent, convincing the Germans that Normandy was still just the opening act. They held Hitler's best troops in place, frozen by indecision, long enough for the Normandy beachhead to be secured and for the breakout to begin. Only then did the Ghost Army finally cross the Channel. But their war of illusion continued. Now, they were on the front lines, a traveling roadshow, operating just miles from the enemy. They performed over 20 different operations in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. Their tactics became bolder. They would draw German units away from a weak point in the American line by simulating a massive and fake armored buildup elsewhere. They would plug a real gap in the line, holding it for days with only speakers and inflatable guns, convincing the Germans that a full division was dug in. This was no longer a game played from the safety of England. The men of the 23rd were now in mortal danger. They came under real artillery fire. They took real casualties. Artists and sound engineers were killed and wounded, sacrificing their lives to maintain an illusion. Their courage was in their creativity, their willingness to fight a 20th century war with weapons of imagination, knowing they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, armed only with a lie. In one of their most brilliant operations, near the end of the war, the U.S. Ninth Army needed to cross the Rhine River. The Germans were dug in, expecting the assault. The 23rd was called in. Over several nights, they simulated the entire buildup for a river crossing at a location 10 miles away from the real target. They played the sounds of amphibious vehicles, of bridge-building equipment, of engineering battalions at work. The Germans, completely fooled, repositioned their artillery and reserves to meet the phantom assault. When the Ninth Army finally crossed at the real, now lightly defended location, they met almost no resistance. It was later estimated that this single deception saved over 10,000 Allied lives. When the war in Europe finally ended, the men of the Ghost Army packed up their rubber tanks and their speaker trucks, and then they were told to be silent. Their entire operation, their methods, their very existence was classified as top secret. It was considered so vital to national security that the deception tactics might be needed again. So these men, the artists, the actors, the engineers, went home. They returned to their quiet lives. Bill Blass went on to build a fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly became one of America's most celebrated painters. But they never spoke of what they did. They couldn't tell their wives, their children, or their friends. They had performed the most spectacular magic trick in history, saved countless lives, and held the fate of the free world in their hands. And they were forbidden from taking a bow. The story remained secret for more than 40 years. It was only in the 1990s that the records were finally declassified, and the surviving veterans, now old men, were finally allowed to tell their stories. The incredible tale of the army of ghosts, of the artists who fooled Hitler, finally came into the light. In 2022, the unit was finally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest honor, for their unique and highly distinguished service. By then, very few of them were left to receive it. We often think of history as a story of steel, of battles, of generals moving divisions on a map. But the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops is a powerful reminder of something else. It is a testament to the fact that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is the human mind. It is a story of ingenuity, of creativity, and of a different kind of courage. The courage to stand in the face of overwhelming force, armed not with a gun, but with an idea. The courage to build a better reality out of paint and rubber and sound. The men of the Ghost Army proved that an illusion can be as powerful as an explosion. They showed that a story, if told well enough, can stop an army. And they taught us that sometimes the most profound victories are not won by the armies we see, but by the ones we are made to imagine. True strength is not always the force you can project. Sometimes it is the shadow you can cast. If these hidden stories of history matter to you, please consider supporting our work by subscribing. It allows us to continue honoring the quiet heroes and the unsung ingenuity that shaped our world.